Many years ago, we met, and the first thing that caught my attention is his focus, not talking about himself, but talking about Africa, Africans, our generation. And I looked at this guy and I'm thinking, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a lawyer. That was very interesting. But he said, you know something, the reality is if we're going to change the focus and the future of this generation, people like NJ and like all of us here, if we have a shared commitment and a common goal, the success of this continent would only be a better place for all of us.
Hello, I'm Isabelle Noack, and I'm here with NJ Ayuk today, energy lawyer and author, as well as CEO of Centurion Law Firm, one of the biggest and most successful law firms on the African continent. Thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Billions at Play, your new book, sets out to provide a roadmap for the development of Africa's energy sector as a means to develop world-class economies. What are 3 things that you believe will be key in Africa achieving prosperity through utilizing its hydrocarbon resources?
I think Africa has come a long way with hydrocarbons, and a lot of it is really going to come with how we use those resources. And 3 big things is, 1, like what we talk in the book, we should stop our dependence on foreign aid and use our resources to really grow our economy, because when you rely on others to give you money to build what you want to build, you would never be truly independent and you really cannot move your economies forward. Second thing we need to look at is how we manage and govern our natural resources. And that comes with issues of transparency, it comes with issues of using our natural resources to bolster our economy, it comes to how we create an enabling environment. So in a sense, even when you do not necessarily it's not really connected to the oil and gas industry, but when you have an enabling environment, all kind of businesses do grow and do become better for everybody. Third thing, a continuous path towards attracting investment and shoring up exploration. The oil and gas industry is one of the best sectors that really shores up African economy. I think these 3 things would really help us boost, but also the ability to transfer this progress to make sure all Africans can really benefit from their resources.
Right, and you're talking about all Africans really benefiting from it. In your book, you're also talking about Africans not really being included in the decision-making process and negotiations. How can African industry leaders really change that and make sure they do become a part of really being part of changing their continent's energy future?
If you're not on the table, you're going to be on the menu, and nobody wants to be on the menu.
Right.
And I think what we try to put in this book is that we've had a critical segment of the African population not really being part of the energy sector. So you look at, for example, issues with regards to women not being part of the Africa oil and gas sector, but also Africans as a whole. Do not forget, you still have a lot of Africans not having access to contracts, not having access to jobs, not having access to beyond decisions, even into seismic acquisitions or exploration. So it's really important that we do, first of all, acquire the skills, acquire access to finance, but then also have access to some of the contracts or some of the licenses that we can also be able to drill, explore, and produce these resources. And that is for us to be able to demand that from government, because governments would never move unless we start demanding it. But we have to be ready, and we have to get to that table. We don't want to be on the menu.
Right. Okay. What are the main challenges presented by the continent's economic environment, particularly in regards to attracting investment and securing deals?
I think issues of transparency has still been something where Africa has been held back when it comes into attracting investment. But we have to move beyond that. And I think moving beyond that sometimes comes with us looking at our ability to negotiate good deals, our ability to have strategy. Okay, I'm a lawyer. I know a lot of people, when they come in, they just say, give me a draft contract. I'll just take your contract and I'll try to fit it in. But we have to start having our own contracts that have our own ideals, our own principles, and how we want to structure the deal. If we're not having that, we don't have an African element to it, you are never going to be it. Because when you go into the game and you're playing with someone's rules, then you can never really actually play your game. And I think this is the same thing that happens with us in Africa, especially the energy sector. We have to draft our own game. So right now you have discussions around climate change. We have to have our own climate agenda. And our own climate agenda has to be at the forefront. We have to have our own local content agenda, and our own local content at the forefront. So in the best way to put it, it would be, we do have a chance to draft our own agenda, set up our own game plan, and then welcome others with their investment to fit into our game plan, and they can profit, and we can also profit as Africans.
Okay. Well, new oil and gas finds off the coast of Africa have led to an increase in investment in infrastructure, technical advances, updates in regulations, and improved governance, as well as the development of new skills. However, exploitation and, of course, production also remains low in many parts of Africa, and Africa still has a long way to go. How can Africa build its momentum and really see significant development?
Well, it comes with us trying to work on ourselves. I'm not really looking at what others ask us to do. I think we go into this place where we say, we now in a part where the continent is moving. You have more people in the continent under 30 years old. So you're going to see a big boom in millennials around Africa. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's a big move towards technology. There's going to be a big move towards the effects of climate effects. It's going to be driven by all places. I mean, they got a guy in the US, says a guy, what do you call it? The CEO of Twitter says he's going to move to Africa. You know, welcome to my life. You know? I think he got up, something hit him. But I think we got beautiful women in Africa, so he probably wants to move to Africa. It's like, but I'll tell him to leave my sisters alone. But so I think it is really good time where we start looking at our continent and we're saying, with technology and what you're going to see, change that. Use these resources to move the game to a different kind of place. But now, what's the next game plan? We have to be thinking about the future. How are we going to leapfrog in the future? And I think technology is really going to drive it. That's really what you have to look at in the future.
Okay, technology being a big part of it. Natural gas also is undoubtedly a way forward for Africa's energy sector, and you talk about this a lot in your book as well. What challenges can the continent anticipate in securing a successful gas future?
I think, African countries should have found gas before they found oil. I think that should have been our biggest mainstay. And here is why. When you find gas, you focus more on development. The history of most African countries of what we've had in the past is, you had oil companies coming to Africa, they found oil. And when they saw gas, they did not drill for gas. They did not go for gas, they just went for oil because they cater to European markets, they cater to American markets, they cater to Asian markets. And those markets were all oil-driven economies. They needed oil for their cars and for their industries and everything. We in Africa needed the gas to create power. We needed the gas to create petrochemicals like urea, ammonia, NPK, fertilizer plants. When you have fertilizer plants, it boosts our agriculture, our cash crops, whether it's cocoa fields or coffee fields, or food crops, whether it's banana, plantains, rice, so we can feed our people. So that we stand to benefit more with gas. And we start to benefit more with converting gas in a clean way to power, because you cannot run industry by generators. So when you have power, our content is better. This is an issue which I'm very passionate about. You have 650 million people in the continent do not have access to any kind of energy. And so the continent is about 1 billion people. So how can you talk about us moving the continent forward when you have 3/4 of the continent without any access to power? That is something which it has to be a clarion call for today, because you have a lot of people who are saying, I do also as an African have some kind of right to power. I do have some kind of right to be able to get up with light without lights going off. You have Nigeria, you flaring so much gas, you flaring so much that the gas that's being flared in Nigeria can really power more than half of the continent, but that's been flared. So you have big multinational corporations, they have done nothing, but also that's not their job, because our own policies, our own procedures never allowed for the development of this gas. So we really have to really drive gas to be the next big thing for Africa. I mean, we could learn. I wrote a very beautiful article about Qatar. They were able to use gas and transform their entire economy. And now Qatar is a big gas hub for the world. Everybody is envious of that. But what the Qatar story tells us is that they were able to take great skills out of America, out of Europe, build a gas sector, power their country, industrialize their country, and now they're still able to send gas abroad, but also looking at their country for the future. We can replicate that, but we can even do it even better, because if you give most Africans the opportunity, you could find a lot of things with African ingenuity at its best. And I think that's what this book represents.
What are the most critical areas that are hindering Africa's energy transition? You kind of already touched on that. Is there anything else? I mean, you talked about policies being a part of that, Africans not being, having a seat at the table. Is there anything else that's really hindering that?
I mean, the energy transition in Africa is something that is very good.
Yeah.
But I think it has to be driven by Africans. We have to not come into a position where somebody else, I mean, there's something which when you're a kid, you say, New York should not drink and Texas gets drunk. That's what you see right now with energy transition. We are going to see an energy transition. It's going to happen. Anybody who doesn't believe in climate change is not really living in the world as we see today. The real issues right here today is us as Africans being able to have our own climate policy. Us and Africans being able to have our own development policy that we say, okay, you use your resources, you use your oil, you drill, and you develop Europe, you develop America, you develop Asia. We are not polluting at the same rate you're polluting. We should be given time to develop our own economies if you are going to stop our own growth because you want to now save your children. We need to be compensated. And I think that is what we've seen where most African leaders have not had the courage to. I think what we're looking at with the chamber is that it's time for us to ask for an African reparations on climate. You need to really compensate Africa for the climate disaster that's been committed. So most of the young people in Europe that are going to be protesting and are going to the climate conferences in Spain, Madrid, or in France, they're doing the right thing. But then these young people should ask themselves, what did our parents do to those poor kids in Africa? What did our parents do to their own, by using their resources and not compensating that? And we think that once we're able to shape this dialogue that way, we will then be able to address everybody on board, because I'm not ready to give up my oil and gas fields because I want some kid in Norway who's made $1 trillion to continue being happy. My own kids are as good as the Norwegian kids. So we have to put Africa's kids first. African lives matter, and that's what I think this discussion. So it's time for us to have a real honest debate about energy transition, and we welcome that debate. And I think that's what I'm part of the African Energy Chamber. That's what the chamber is advocating, and we will continue having that dialogue across Europe, across America, and across Africa. But Africans cannot be put in the backseat when we cannot afford it, because it's going to affect what this is called when it comes to financing exploration campaigns, financing new drilling of production fields, financing new power campaigns. We have to make sure that we are on the table, but they have to answer real questions on how we are going to be compensated for these losses that we're going to take with the whole energy transition. The transition is good, but it has to be done fair and it has to be balanced.
And switching that dialogue, changing that dialogue, how realistic do you think that is? I mean, it's already starting because you're talking about it, people are talking about it, but like you rightly said, we have protests going on, Fridays for Future all around Europe, and nobody's really talking about the whole picture. What did their parents and grandparents do to the African continent, for example? How realistic do you think it is for that conversation to really change? I
think that conversation can change when, first of all, go to the African Energy Chamber and join us.
Okay.
You know, if you do, and again, second thing, you have to buy my book.
Okay.
So when you buy that book, that's part of it. It's $29.99. A lot of these young kids can afford it. If everybody out there protesting buys Billions at Play,
okay,
they'll find more reasons to not go out there and waste their time. But I think they have the right to protest, and we need to protect that. One of the key issues that you have to really look at is that dialogue we had, the people out there protesting, they're good people. We should never try to deride them or say that they're wrong. They're right. They do have valid points, but we also have valid points as Africans. One of the key things is I can't blame the kid in Europe or America. They are there protesting for their own self-interest. We as Africans, we also have to protest for our own self-interest. We have to make our voices heard. We have to put out our own interest. This is not something that is going to be left to governments alone. Most Africans do not believe in government. They feel government has let them down.
Right.
And I think it's when you have business, you have government, you have citizens come together, then they can really say we can play. But if there's no leadership, then we all have to have our own individual actions. You know, we live in a continent today where you have more people are connected. A lot of young people around Africa, they're more connected to Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Viber, even some that I don't even know. But they can't get a block association meeting together. So you have to use all your mediums of communications and drive up an African point of view in this dialogue, because this is no time when you are going to come back here and you complain that they didn't talk to us. You don't need to go to Paris. You don't need to go to Madrid. You can use your Twitter and you can tweet. You can get on Facebook. You can get on LinkedIn. You can get on Instagram. And you could IG somebody and say, hey, hear me too. And that's really what matters.
Okay, so like so much in life, it's all about education, and we can educate ourselves by reading your book, first of all, joining your organization, and just being informed, as so often in life. Without a doubt, over the next decade, Africa's energy industry will undergo massive transformation. This is kind of what we've been talking about. What is the importance of laying down local content policies? We also talked about that kind of, but if you can just touch on the importance of policies and practices that should be put into place ahead of this major transformation that is undoubtedly going to happen over the next decade.
I mean, local content is so important. I mean, we've seen an industry where Africans have been the last hired and the first fired. And that's what we try to bring around our book. We say, listen, we can no longer have Africans not being able to get jobs in the oil and gas industry, not being able to get contracts in the oil and gas industry. Whenever there's a contract, you have to go to Europe or you have to go to America. But then we've successfully laid out local content policies that created a wave of African billionaires and millionaires around Africa. I mean, Ghana has done a good job at laying out a great local content foundation. You also have Nigeria has done an excellent job with local content. Equatorial Guinea is doing something. You have Gabon, Cameroon, and Congo. They're trying to boost up local content. That is not enough. What with the Africa Free Trade Agreement right now being implemented, you have to change that and start having Africa content policy. So what that means is, if you cannot find a job for a contract, for example, in Nigeria, for example, you don't have to skip to London or Europe or America to find a foreign company. You should be able to look at around and say, is there a company in Ghana? Is there a company in South Africa? Is there a company in Egypt that can do that? So we use African talent, African resources, but also create a framework where you can tap into the fast African diaspora that they can really play a great role at really empowering our economies and really driving us forward. That's something we don't tap into. You have a big population of Africans that have some of the best skills in Europe, some of the best skills in America. They've gone into some of the best universities you could find, but we need to tap into that talent pool. And that talent pool, if properly used, it's really going to help transform the talent, skill, and the human capital that sometimes might be lacking in the continent. And I think we have to see that as a future, and that's a big advantage. The oil and gas sector and the complete energy sector, you're having a big number of people that are retiring and they're tired and they're walking away. But how do we close that talent gap? We have to seek out young people, get them in, look at the Africa diaspora, get them in, and when you get them, it gives a chance for a lot of Africans to be able to benefit and really have good, not just good jobs, but well-paying jobs in the industry, and then drive it forward. And then you see people start having the dignity of work, because every home has somebody who is working and they can lead better lives.
Okay, so it's not just about Africans in Africa, but also the diaspora, inviting them back home to work in the continent.
I mean, Ghana just had a big project on the year of return.
Right.
They are Africans. I think the diaspora has a big role to play. Anybody who tries to keep the diaspora out. And that's why, we look at issues around Africa, we look at issues like dual nationality. That should not even be a question.
Right.
In 2020, like, give me a break. It's like, so you tell someone that they can't come back because they became part of the adopted home. I actually want those guys because they felt a sense of citizenship, a sense of belonging wherever they were. So we need to get back, we need to walk away from our mindset in the 60s and catch up with 2020. So we need to do that in Africa, and we need to do that quick.
Yeah, and like you said, it's true. Ghana is setting a nice example for that year of return. I think they reached their visa gap, just sending out, giving out so many visas. There's another chapter in your book titled "A Place at the Table: Africa and OPEC." You talk about the benefits of stable markets to not only the economy, but also everyday Africans, and the importance of taking a unified stand in a way to develop Africa's hydrocarbon resources. How can OPEC further contribute to Africa gaining its voice in the global oil industry?
I think OPEC has played a big role in shaping the oil market. And I think the OPEC Declaration of Cooperation, which was masterminded by actually an African, played a great role, Mohamed Bakindo, who is the Secretary General. And I think that has done something so unique to the continent and to the oil markets around the world, where they brought in Russia, they brought in other non-OPEC countries to really expand the coalition and say, we all have a stake in making sure that the oil industry, it is stable. And that affects everybody who goes to the pump to get gas, or everybody who needs oil in any kind of way of business or life. I think Africans contribution more into OPEC. And I have been lucky to have gone into OPEC meetings. It is very deliberative. They debate everything. Nothing is always set in those meetings. Iran comes in with its own agenda. Saudi Arabia comes with its own agenda. Nigeria comes in with its own agenda. Libya comes with its own agenda. And so does Angola. But I think what we have today is that you have 7 member countries of OPEC coming from Africa. That means we have a seat at the table. But a seat at the table doesn't mean anything unless you know how to use it. A seat at the table means being able to use those tools, first of all, to work on collective action, to stabilize the market, but beyond stabilizing the market, also preparing to ensure that the market benefits also consumers. Because countries which are net importers like India, like China, or other African countries that are not producing, they're consumers. You have to look out for them. It's not just about exporters right now or those who produce oil. And I think Africans, we've been there. I think it's a chance for Africa to be the conscience of the oil market, that we can really stabilize that. So we have a role to play, but we have to use it.
Okay. How can, talking about other nations, how can the African energy industry encourage American oil and gas companies to not only enter Africa on a one project basis, but more for long-lasting operations that are ultimately beneficial to both parties and not just the Americans?
I think U.S. firms have been very good in Africa when it comes in terms of bringing technology into the continent. And I think some of the biggest fields in Africa have been discovered by American firms. You go to Nigeria, some of the deep water fields, American firms did it. You look at Equatorial Guinea, you look at Angola, you look at Congo, you look at Gabon, and they bring a certain technology which it's tried, true, and tested from the Gulf of Mexico. And that them being able to harmonize that and look at the same kind of geological areas in Africa, and being able to harness that and have new kind of exploration and really be able to discover it. And they bring in a certain way of doing business that can be beneficial to everybody. But American companies also have a different kind of standard as well. And I think those standards comes with issues of transparency. It comes with them bringing American ideals and American ingenuities. And we have to embrace that. We have to also benefit from that. We have to grow from that. I'm a product of someone who was lucky to have been trained in America, worked for American companies. So I do understand how that can shape you. It can shape your commercial acumen. You can shape how you see business. And I think we need more of that. So it is not something, it's not either or. We want both. It's like buy one, get one free. And so I think the more we engage with U.S. companies, but also looking at the changing world today, you have to look at European companies, which have traditionally been our partners, but we've not really seen a lot more benefit than just being people who've been used. We need to change that. And we really need to engage them more. Now you get a new wave where you're seeing the Chinese getting involved. It's not a bad thing for the Chinese to be in Africa, but we also have to set out the rules and level the playing field. But the biggest investor, which I want in Africa, is the African investors. Because when Africans invest in Africa, we can really build our own continent without relying on aid or relying on other people to come do it for us.
Okay, it's kind of like Africa wants trade and not aid. And you would say the first priority should be Africans investing in Africa. You're welcoming also international corporations, but only when they're beneficial to everybody involved.
I mean, you don't want to welcome a bad guest into your house. True. That's as simple as that. Yeah. So, if you have somebody coming to your house, you want to say, you're welcome, but here are the rules. Maybe you got to go to bed at 9. Instead of at your home, you go to bed at 11. In my home, we go to bed at 8. Someone has to get used to that. But I think we are at a time where Africans need to invest in Africa. Okay. It's really essential, and we have to shape what happens in the future.
Okay. Well, I have one last question for you. Why is Africa the hottest oil and gas frontier, particularly in a time when the world, like you kind of said earlier, is determined to move towards a more renewable energy-focused energy future?
Because Africa is still the most underexplored and underdeveloped when it comes to natural resources. You're going to see a lot of, look at it right now. There was $50 billion of investment in Mozambique coming in from a slew of oil companies when they came into gas development. You turn around, you look at Senegal, you've seen 2 or 3 LNG trains would be built in the Senegal and Mauritania area where there have been a lot of discoveries. You've seen a lot of new discoveries happening in Uganda that is going to be developed. I was just informed today that they have a resolution to the tax dispute there. So you're going to see more. Tanzania has almost 60 TCF of gas that is going to be developed. And you look at Sudan, South Sudan, the Chinese companies discovered almost 300 million barrels of petrol that still has to be developed. And not to talk about the potential in Libya, Algeria, Egypt, and then in South Africa, which no one thought there's going to be a discovery there. Total found almost 1 billion barrels of condensate. So there are a lot of projects, and you get a lot of new potentials that are coming. And that you see now they've been able to turn suspects into prospects. And I think that's really what's going to make Africa really the hottest spot you will see over the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you so much. And your new book is available. You encourage everybody to read it. That's what you want to gain with your book, right? That people become more aware of what's really going on. Earlier you mentioned that maybe they're going to find that going out on the streets protesting is not the most useful thing that they can do. Is there anything else that you want to reach with your book, or that you want to?
I think what I laid out in this book is an everyday test on how to do deals, an everyday test on the oil and gas industry, and go out there and protest, go out there and agitate, go out there and get engaged, but also buy the book because the book would help you understand more the industry and really engage in the industry in a way that you've never done it. And I think that's what Billions at Play offers. It's still $29.99 on Amazon.
$29.99 at Amazon. Billions at Play is for everybody, young people protesting on the streets as well as older people. Billions at Play. NJ Ayuk, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.